Hey everybody, Marcus here, and we wanted to share a pretty interesting topic. Marveline and I really delved into this topic, and we thought it was worth splitting into two episodes. So please enjoy this first installment of how we talk about self sabotage, and then be sure to join us for the second episode next time. Thank you so much for tuning in to Compassion and Courage. Hey, everybody, welcome to this episode of Compassion and Courage Conversations in Healthcare. I'm your host, Marcus Engel. With me, as always, is my other hostess, Marveline Engel. Hey, babe.
Good afternoon. It's
Or
great to
morning,
be
or
here.
evening.
That's absolutely true.
And this is the podcast where we teach compassionate communication, provide perspective, and inspire resilience. So, we really got into this article that we both read recently and identified with to a certain extent. And we thought that we'd bring a little bit about this article to you and share some points today, with the subject being self sabotage. And I was tempted to, as all Gen Xers would remember, Sabotage is a great song by the Beastie Boys. I thought about playing that this morning on guitar before starting this subject, but alas, we're just here to talk about self sabotage today. So, have you ever sabotaged yourself, hon?
Okay, first, I totally think you should have sang the song. That's great.
Okay.
But I'm telling you the truth. Reading this article, and then of course that makes us dig into other research about the same subjects and topics. It was a little moment of holy cow. Um, there's we're going to discuss several areas of self-sabotage, but it's like I'm guilty of all of those. Are you kidding me? I do this all the time. It was a little painful, but sometimes you have to have a little pain to grow.
Well, it starts with acknowledgement, right? And that's what we
Mhm.
want to get into. Should we start with a definition, though, of what self sabotage is,
Okay.
or even just sabotage?
Well, self-sabotage obviously is when you are doing a consistent behavior that harms, and it harms first your mental health. And when you are constantly doing behaviors that sabotage yourself, affects your mental health. It affects your physical health. It affects your relationship health. And eventually it trickles down to your career health, the way you care for others' health. Um,
And
it,
even your identity and
yes,
personality at the worst, at the far end of that spectrum.
right. And initially, the fact that it affects your mental health, we know that cascades down to everything else. And it was a little like, whoa, I've got to rethink some things. And I've already, because we've been going through this, I've already started trying to put some of this into practice. So it was pretty eye-opening, and we think it will be really, really helpful for every single person.
I certainly identified with these six. I don't want to say they're characteristics or
Behaviors,
behaviors, I suppose. Yeah.
habits.
I certainly identified with all of them to a certain extent. I don't think any of them have completely taken over my identity and personality. But as far as sabotage goes, yeah, I've done all of these different ways of sabotaging myself. And I'm thinking about throughout my adult life, how many times have I been the one to get in my own way and I didn't accomplish my goal because I sabotaged it in some way. And that's something to work around. So how do you think that we start to work around some of these self-sabotaging behaviors that
Well,
we can get into?
obviously recognizing them is number one. And I love how we're going to kind of crack open. None of these behaviors that we talk about are exclusively bad. It's kind of like a tool belt, and you have to have that one tool you pull out occasionally. And some of them you may not even think are bad at all because you may think it's self protective. And the problem is when it slips into the primary tool, the only tool, or a habit, let's say, that begins to define your identity. And when you get stuck in an identity, we then you have a problem. Then it really starts to become an even bigger problem. And the first one we're going to talk about um, is one that is such a good example of that because it is the perfectionist. And that means you've you take on this role that everything I do has to be flawless, and I'm not going to try it if it's not perfect. I'm going to do it perfect. And here's where it gets me, because I know that I am very, very guilty of being a perfectionist, and I think I was born that way. I don't know, I just think I was. And you go from sitting at the front row, getting straight A's, sobbing if you don't get the extra credit points. Straight A's aren't good enough, you know, these kind of things. Um, to really being proud of the fact that, oh, yeah, I was a perfectionist. I always got straight A's. I wanted straight A's. I needed straight A's. So you go from then you're proud of this thing that now stops you from trying new things because you're not going to be perfect at everything you try. So you don't even try. So that's to me such a good example of something that by itself occasionally may not be bad. If you're going to be doing brain surgery on me, please be a perfectionist while you do it. But because I want you also mentally healthy, um, don't carry that around as your only tool that you have. Use it appropriately and lay it down when it's not appropriate.
Boy, I think of perfectionism lately with you and I trying to plan a getaway and and wanting to cover all of the bases and knowing that part of a trip part of any trip is the adventure part where we don't know what's coming next. That's difficult for a perfectionist to deal with, I think, oftentimes, because they want every event to be exactly on time, and these are the expectations, and this is how it will happen. And unfortunately, that's just not how life rolls. If you have, or you, if you're a perfectionist or a recovering perfectionist, I'd encourage you to keep in mind that there is some adventure to not knowing. There's some adventure to not knowing, and studies prove that the more adventures that we have, the happier we are.
That is true. And I'm kind of giggling because you're reading my mail. We've been dealing with this and it's absolutely true. Um, if I'm involved, I need to be perfect at it. It has become a part of my identity over the years. And learning, one of the things we use, because you and I are both have this ability, we thankfully became informed of the 80-20 rule that says if you are 80% happy with what you've done, call it good enough and let it go. Now, not my brain, if you're working on my brain surgery, not then, but in general, for the rest of your life, if you're 80% happy, just call it good and go.
Yeah, the 80-20 rule, the 80-20 principle, and this is not something that we came up with. This
Mm-mm.
was
We learned about
discovered, hundreds of years ago by, I believe, Italian philosopher named Peretti, and he saw that 80% of the peas in his garden came from 20% of the plants.
it.
And
Interesting.
so he started applying this principle throughout other aspects of life. And the one that I always fall back on because I have too many clothes in my closet is that 80% of the time we're wearing 20% of what's in our closet. And this
Right.
principle and rule kind of applies to life in many different ways, like that. And
It does.
so we try not to get caught up in this idea that it has to be 100%. Now, of course, we are always striving to be as great as possible and as flawless as possible. But the times when it gets caught up, like I can't release this until it's perfect. We knew this from writing my books that if you're 80% happy with it, do it. Now, because I am a perfectionist and because what I write about typically is memoir and it's my life story and I want to tell it as great as I can, I try to bump that up to more like 90, 10.
Oh, come
But
on, you
that's just
try for
me.
100. Just admit it.
Yeah,
We,
true,
we both
true.
do. But we do. It'll never get done if you don't. Um, some things like that will never get done if you don't just say, okay, I'm 80% good with this. I can let it go, and that 20% will
Must be close
cost
enough.
me or someone else something. Obviously, with safety in the hospital, you want to be 100. You know, things of that nature. Okay, let's talk about quickly how you know if you're a perfectionist, and we've been teasing each other about how we know, but the common behaviors of a perfectionist include procrastination and indecisiveness and an inability to delegate and feeling unsatisfied no matter what happens. And it's the perfect setup to burnout. And burnout is ultimately what you need to avoid to have a happy life, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
this is where it leads. Perfectionism is not your friend except in specific situations. So, what do you do if you're a perfectionist? And we didn't say at the beginning, but obviously we are not
We are
psychologists.
not PhDs. We are not psychologists. So these are generalized tips. Please don't take these to your mental health professional saying that we told you to do these things.
That's right. This is just kind of a jumping off point. And one of the things you can do if you hear this and you go, oh, I thought it was good to be a perfectionist. Martha Stewart at home, nothing less satisfies me, whatever it is. Okay, this is where you can start. Um, Focus on the fact that imperfection is unavoidable. It's going to happen in certain situations. It's going to happen and it's unavoidable, and that's for anyone. So try to focus, reframe it, and focus on progress instead of perfection. I did better, so I win. I win for doing better. I celebrate the small wins. If I did something great and I got perfect on it, or I got really good on it, celebrate it. Don't feel bad if it's not 100 plus the extra credit. Go ahead, celebrate that you did really good, and try to get a mindset that says, and we say this verbally out loud, it's harder to live, but we say, you either get it right or you get an education. That's your two options. If you didn't get it perfect, you learn something about how to get it better next time. So there's no failure in trying. You just got an education on how to do it better next time.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So that's the first one, and that's the one that stabbed me to death in the heart, although most of these did a little bit. The next one to talk about for self-sabotage is the avoider.
Mm.
And that just means you delay action through procrastination, distraction, Instagram, um, and you often will sidestep anything that makes you feel inadequate. You just shoot, you jump in another lane. You will not live with I'm an inadequate. I avoid negative feelings, period.
you know, I try not to be an avoider, but I still avoid. In fact, I did it one time this last week. There was a difficult phone call that I had to make, and I uh, put it off, but I only put it off for about 36 hours. And then I made that call because I know that I personally cannot live with the guilt and it's not a shame, but it is a guilt that comes along with avoiding hard topics. I can't live with that. I need to face things straight on in my life, or else I feel like I'm not actually doing it right.
And a lot of these cross over and lap over, right? And
Sure.
you I know you occasionally this happens. This is not your MO. You jump in and tackle the hard thing. And that's fabulous. This is how you know if this is a real problem for you. You put off tasks if they sound overwhelming or they produce anxiety. People with anxiety um, often will consistently delay starting a project because it feels overwhelming. They get afraid, they get nervous, so they will just put it off. And because we are overwhelmed, because we put it off, then we usually don't get the best outcome, right? If you've put it off, then you're rushing at the end, if you do it at all. And it doesn't usually get you where you want to go. Jumping in and starting leads to a higher level of success.
It's that old saying that a journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step. And that's a step that usually I try to make pretty quickly because I know if I avoid it, I tend to avoid it longer and then longer. And the pressure to finish the task starts to get on my nerves and I have to move forward. And so, but that's just the way that I'm wired. My avoidance tactics don't hold up very long.
Well, and I think you just said something really important because we are connecting this to mental health. And that's one of the things. If you are avoiding stuff, it does build pressure. It does build the very thing you're trying to get away from, which is it's making me too anxious. So I'm avoiding it. But it's like this elephant over your head, always waiting to drop, and it gets bigger and bigger. So, okay, suffering from avoidance. What do? Here's one place to start. Break those hard tasks down into smaller things. And this is not groundbreaking. Did I say that right?
Yeah.
Groundbreaking. We've always heard them say, okay, so I can't clean my closet out. It's too crazy. Set a 5-minute timer and just do 5 minutes. And that positive endorphins that you get from completing 5 minutes often make you able to do another 5 minutes. And before you know it, you've been in there a little while and you've accomplished way more than you thought. But it's that jumping off instead of avoiding. So break it down into a little manageable task and then see what happens and then set a deadline for things. Sometimes it helps to jump into the easier things first, but jump in, get some of those we talked about earlier wins. We call them W's around here. Get a couple of those wins under your belt, and it helps you have the motivation to continue. And all of these things, we're giving you a little tip on how to start. But if you hear these and you go, oh man, I do that all the time, or I really, really struggle with that, get a coach, get a therapist, get someone who can help you actually walk out of these sabotaging behaviors to have more success. So that's kind of the thing you do about avoiding.
Okay, this seems like a good place to stop for episode 1, so please be sure to join us for episode 2 on the subject of self sabotage.